Welcome back to Cheche, the program where opinion counts. Does a university education make you a better leader? Today's guests say yes. We have Professor Frederick Wanyama. He's the Deputy Principal in charge of Academic Research, Innovations and Extension at Murang'a University College, and Professor Tony Carbo, who's currently with the Uganda Martyrs University. And before the break, we promised to come into the issue, explore the issue of output, the quality of graduates that we're churning out, given the fact that we're trying to comply with affirmative action. David, please.
Yeah, the question, of course, I don't know whether this is across the continent, but locally, Prof, you must appreciate that there is, you know, the criticism that is persisting, that after people leave college and enter the marketplace, they still need to go through another sort of, you know, upgrading or training to fit, which I don't think was the same in the earlier years, going back 80s and 70s. Somebody left university, they were completely experts.
They were employment ready.
Yes, straight away, governments picked them in a hurry. We're not seeing that. Private sector now, they think twice about which college, what did you bring the papers. They almost want to take you through
most of them have their own
establish whether
on-the-job training before they can...
what you are claiming.
Well, I think there is some validity in your observation. That somehow some of the graduates that we produce may not be up to a certain level of expectation, and that can be explained from the challenges that university education went into from the 80s.
But we're not in the 80s.
Yes, but we must trace it there.
30 years down the line?
Structural adjustment programs, as long as we don't have sufficient resources for reviewing curricula, for hiring staff, and look also at the numbers of students that we are now handling, we are likely to miss out on a few things. Then, together with that, we are also witnessing very, very fast changes in our societies, which some curricula might not have adjusted to. And for the curricula to adjust to such changes, it again goes back to the question of resources for reviewing curricula, for hiring relevant staff, and eventually producing that graduates. Yes, there are challenges, but we need to start addressing them.
Sir, isn't it the case that enrollment is high? You're churning out huge numbers of graduates, but they're not ready for the job market, and part of that has to do with the fact that the university education is irrelevant. It hasn't been adjusted or adapted to meet the needs of society.
I think we need to take a look at this from two perspectives, perhaps. And the first is how responsive is curricula in universities to the needs of society. And I think largely we're looking at curricula in the 21st century that is still anchored perhaps in the 20th century, if you ask me. Kenya, fortunately, is forging ahead to a very large extent because it is forming perhaps a very strong technological base, and the tertiary education system is responding to the changes, rapid changes in technology, and so it's sitting in a pretty good position. And so you hear everybody talking about Kenya is the technological hub in East Africa, if not in fact on the continent. It's taking a lead, and I think tertiary education institutions must respond to societal needs. They must respond to development needs, and that means that we need to go back and take a look at curricula. Is the curriculum that we make in a school, in a department, is it addressing the needs of society?
Okay.
Even if they do it, say for instance, in Kenya we need a lot of engineers.
Sure.
We need a lot of ICT people. We need doctors. We need engineers. Now, the university here in Murang'a, or whichever university you can think about, goes and registers students to study engineering. The professional body that employs and registers engineers is not consulted. The curriculum they teach is not approved by the professional body. So the students go through 4 years and they are told, oh, no job. You are, whatever you studied, you can't do this, you can't do that. How does that happen?
And this is where I think leadership and the institutions that we establish that are supposed to be addressing these issues are relevant, are important. And so therefore you need to have institutions that will regulate how tertiary institutions operate. They will regulate quality, so there has to be certain standards that are to be met by each and every tertiary institution that is set up. These institutions therefore must have leaders that are willing to go back and monitor how these things are operating. In Uganda, for example, there is a national they call it niche, National Higher Education Commission, which really, in spite of the large numbers of private institutions that have come up, actually goes back and checks on each of these institutions. Is your curriculum really relevant? Do you have qualified staff to teach, in these institutions? And what is the caliber of students that you actually attract? And so they're doing a pretty good job in terms of checking on or putting, checks on these institutions. And maybe that's how the rest of the continent needs to go.
The Kenyan problem is the parallel programs, where the standard has been set, but people are slipping through and getting admission to parallel courses, which are further depressing the standards we're talking about, Prof.
I don't think parallel may necessarily be the problem. I think there are more fundamental problems to do with the infrastructure, to do with the resources that we have to run the programs, but not really the qualifications of students that come to the university through parallel admissions. I think students that we admit through the parallel process have met the minimum requirements as set by the Commission for University Education. The question that we may be asking is whether the number of students that we are adding on as parallel students match the facilities, the resources that we have in place in the universities. So why would the
university do that? Why would
again,
yes, they can't teach?
Let me come to that. The reason why they do that is where we came from. Little funding to the universities. And universities are being encouraged to generate more resources. Universities are not farms. Universities are academic institutions. The only way we can generate resources is by offering the services that we are meant to offer. And that is teaching.
Fees. What you are saying is
yes, that's precisely.
So I bring my child, I pay school fees, stays here for 4 years, finishes and gets a degree, and I sold my farm or I sold my cow, and he will not be employed. That's very unfair.
No. I don't think that's the intention of any university, to produce a student that cannot be.
But talking about the rigor of the training, how rigorous is the academic, the exercise? That is really the problem. Of course, you talk about numbers being disproportionate with the staffing. So you have huge classes, supervision, contact with the students is limited, supervision is really reduced. That is the problem. We're not getting, therefore, good products out to the market because of that process.
So you've answered your own question.
Yes.
And so if we were to come to the original question, which is universities and governance, are we then surprised that we have such critical leadership and governance challenges on the continent?
Because of the caliber of students that we produce?
Because it does appear that the university system is failing Africans. If you talk about it as being this space where critical thinking that advances society is developed, and we've talked about the problems, how can we then have people who are actually...
So then should we blame universities for failures of our government? Because you should be providing the solution. That is where it cuts.
The government does not mark papers.
Yes.
We have a situation in most universities. You have a situation in these universities where you hear student exam papers, results are missing. Why?
I think results never miss.
Okay. They do, Professor Carroll.
Yeah, I think essentially the university has three major functions, and that is teaching, research, and outreach.
Yes.
And I think if we look at these three functions, the nexus between the university and the community should be with its outreach. Now, the outreach with regard to universities helping governments, for example, to devise policies, to implement policies, to come up with ideas that will lead a country forward, and that's the role a university should play. And how do they, come up with these outreach ideas? It must be based on evidence. It must be based on the research that universities do or should do. And I think part of the challenge is also the issue of resources. It goes back to, do universities have the sufficient resources to undertake these three principal functions? Obviously, right now, the focus is on just the teaching part of it. And so you have 300 students in an undergraduate class, many of them climbing on windows and looking through to see if they can even see the professor. And if you're a small professor like myself, the student probably might not see you. And so, but these are challenges of resources, these are challenges of infrastructure, and so therefore it impairs the university from, actually carrying out the fundamental roles of teaching, research,
Professor
and
Kaba, would you
outreach.
agree that the focus seems to be on technical education and not, say, character education, education that is founded on values that are critical to a society, so that we turn out people who are possibly proficient, but as Mutegi was talking about, are morally unsound?
Well, again, I think you have to go back and take a look at how we do things. And the way we do things is really found in what we purport to provide for the students. And that is all, rather, should be packaged in the curricula that we provide. The curricula must respond to values. It must respond to culture. It must respond to society and how different groups, interact with one another. So issues of diversity. And this, again, goes back to, are we designing curricula? The other day we were talking about the curricula and how most of the texts we actually prescribe for our students are not written by us Africans. And those of us who develop them really sometimes forget that we have a ton of Africans who have written on different issues that address our own specific needs on the continent. And so my question is, where are you looking? I mean, if you're really looking in the right places, you will find many African authors, many African writers, many Africans who have contributed to knowledge and to address the issues on the continent.
Similarly on that, a flight engineer says, you seem to be oblivious to the fact that there are other qualifications that are much higher than your university degrees, e.g. licenses in aircraft engineering, aircraft maintenance engineers, licensed flight engineers, where an ordinary degree holder is not allowed to authorize an aircraft to fly unless he is authorized by the ICAO. This from Aroko. Universities have failed to teach ancient African values and true African history because of Western influence. You've just been making that point. And commercialization. That came from Aroko. Universities are citadels of mediocrity. They perpetuate tribalism and are in dire need of qualified staff and teaching facilities. They're a ticking bombshell. Now, sir, you're affiliated with a Catholic university at the moment, and there's a question here from somebody, I think one of our MPs, Honorable Wahinya. The university in Kitengela called UMA is organized to accommodate the Muslim community. Please comment.
I think, Prof, you should comment on that, because that's specific to Kenya, I suppose, and so perhaps you have. For me, I think my response would be, how do you manage diversity? And this also has to do with policy issues, which is what our program is really about. Management of diversity. It's not because we live in a diverse community that is the problem. It is how these diverse groups are managed and how we allow them through policy to interact with one another.
I think the case of UMA goes back to the issue of values that we should be also promoting in our curricula. And we have a number of universities that are founded on such kinds of values. Catholic university, Strathmore founded on some religious values, Methodists that are, and so UMA just fits among those kinds of institutions that are coming up to support certain values in society, but also advancing higher education in the process.
Let's talk about curriculum relevant to society. You look at the MIT or Harvard University, there is a lot of integration between what they do and what government department in America requires. I know Cheche University has some components of training military people, police. They have curriculum that fits policemen and military people, and maybe some other universities. How much of that is happening in our university? That we can have a university like Murang'a University, knowing what does Murang'a people need, what is their problem, and then integrating them and you.
I think there is a lot of such kinds of activities that are going on that the public may not be aware of. In terms of the university crafting some programs that are fit for certain components, certain segments of society. What Egerton is doing is just one. Maseno, where I was until a few weeks ago, we had also certificate diploma programs in security and national security and strategy and national security, which attracted a lot of security people, both in the police service, in private security providers, and so on. There are a number of targeted curricula for various components of society that various universities are doing. In Murang'a, it was basically a college of technology that specialized in providing vocational skills for various artisans. And that is still continuing, as much as it's a university college, but we are still continuing.
So are we losing out on the vocational training in pursuit of university education?
To some extent, yes. We have seen a number of technical training colleges being converted into universities. To that extent, yes. But I think we also have...
Is it wrong? Because we need that. We need artisans. Every surveyor needs a draftsman. Every doctor needs some technicians.
Yeah.
Why are we doing that?
Well,
I know the former Minister for Education, she was not interested in that. In fact, she stopped more tertiary colleges being taken by universities.
I think that problem has been realized and is being fixed. We have a rollout of various technical training institutions. We have the TAVETA. We have an authority now, the Technical and Vocational Training Authority, that is spearheading the creation, the revival, the strengthening of technical colleges across the country, and that is intended to fill the gap that might have been created following the conversion of some of those technical training institutions into universities. And so
I'm really keen to explore this line about universities and their relevance to governance.
Let me read something from our viewers, which says, this is the most elite parliament and the most corrupt in spite of their seemingly impressive qualifications. And that came from Philip in Githurai. And I think that anchors your question.
Yeah. What is the nexus between government and universities? And are governments appreciating and using the research or the activities happening in our universities? Are they tapping the resource of our universities in fixing government or governance issues?
Yeah.
Really? That's really...
There has been some kind of a disconnect between the university and the government, particularly from the 1980s in Kenya, when academic freedom was curtailed. Those who are critical were viewed to be anti-government, and even some of the constructive criticisms that should have helped to streamline our governance structures were put aside. And since that time,
history. Now you are free.
Since that time, we have been doing things that way, but there is a lot of effort in bringing about some convergence between government actors and the universities.
Because how much research, how much of your research, if I may put it that way, policy, how much input into policy are universities making? Really? Maybe
I think across the continent there is not any sufficient interface between government and institutions of higher education, and for that matter, even private, corporations. And I think that's where we need to work a little bit more on. We need to create relationships amongst these three entities because they are important for one another. If you must have governance systems that are functional and that are responsive to the needs of society, then those systems must be informed by research, which the university ought to do. And if private entities must develop, engage in innovation, must develop the technology that we'll be using tomorrow, must develop the medicines that will cure the different diseases, in the continent. We must engage one another. And I think there is not any sufficient engagement amongst these three stakeholders. If you go to European or Western countries, you find there is a lot of that partnership.
Especially around industry. So the question I want to put to you, still with governance, and following on from Professor Kabu's response, here in Kenya, we thought it best to have politicians who at least had some sort of tertiary qualification. That was watered down. MCAs, parliamentarians. So now all they need is a high school certificate. Again, we come back to the issue of the quality of our leadership, the quality of governance that we are experiencing, and how relevant this education is, given that we don't require it of our leaders.
I don't think we don't require it. It is the mechanism for putting in place that requirement that has seemed problematic, because the people who are making decisions on whether to put that requirement in as a qualification for people who enter into governance positions, they seem to look at it themselves in some kind of mirror, and they look at the decision in their own light, and that has always watered down some of these.
You're talking about selfish interests.
Selfish.
So, as a professor of political science, given the experience of the past 3 years of the Constitution, will you be recommending, as we go into the election of 2017, that MCAs and MPs have a tertiary qualification?
I think it would be important for them to have some level of understanding public issues, levels of understanding what international developments that are occurring elsewhere, and it's within that framework that they have to make policy, and that's why we are trying also to come in with some new innovations on how to bring the politicians, the policy actors into the same framework with academics and give them those skills that they may be missing or they may not be aware about. And one of those initiatives is the master's program that we are doing. We sat together and realized that much of the policy in African countries, I thought it was only Kenya, much of the policy in African countries is not informed by evidence, and there are just selfish interests that drive most of these policy making processes.
So how different is this one, and how is it being administered, just in a nutshell?
We are calling it Master of Research and Public Policy, and the main focus is to train people who have the capacity to do research and present that research in a manner that the policymakers can use it to make perhaps informed decisions, informed policies, and in doing that, we are bringing on board the policy actors in their various diversity into the process of this training, in the sense that we are making them part of the training of the cadre of
But what if you're churning out all this useful research and the policymaker deems it useless because they have no appreciation for the hard work and the evidentiary-based research?
I think, to the contrary, the few interactions I have had with the policymakers, they are increasingly looking for that information, that evidence. Many other times, whenever they are now trying to make policy, they are looking for shorter, precise, information that can help them, that can guide them into making policy. I don't think they find it completely...
It's a bit strange. I mean, okay, about that synergy between government and universities. The most government does is to poach an academic and bring them into government, appoint them to ministry. Like in Kenya, we've seen Professor Ikiara from the economics department became minister for transport, yes. Now we got Dr. Ndemo came in from the ICT, became PS. We've had now Professor Kaimenyi. Wouldn't this be sufficient basis for them to pull government to the universities? Because they go there and government sets up its own institutions of research, policy, and they ignore where these people have come from.
I really want
but to... But even those people, when they go to government, they forget to invest. You remember Professor
that's the whole point.
Or the only person maybe who is the guy who was doing the assistant minister for education, the one who was at Kenyatta, Meruman. Maybe, but others when they go to
Memoria.
Yes. The others when they go to university, busy, the busies of this world.
Yes,
they forget the university.
I think it's a structural problem that we'll have to solve with time.
Is it a structural problem or a character problem? Because remember, you're telling us that if we have this university education, we are better suited to govern. And so we then take people and put them in government, and they don't perform to expectations.
I'm calling it structural because of the informal structures that we have had in our politics for a long time, which have overshadowed the formal structures that we have always had. And when you bring these academics into this domain, then the informal structures tend to take over from the formal ones. And then the academics...
Politics overwhelms them,
yes,
so to speak. Yes.
But
they're not part of the political club.
What we are doing now is trying to institutionalize politics rather than informalize politics that it has always been before. And when we institutionalize politics, then perhaps even if academics are poached, they are going there to work within rules, regulations that are there, rather than going back into the informal structures, and then they end up forgetting where they came back, where they came from.
Right. This is Cheche. We're live on Citizen TV. We'll be back after this break.